Alright, hello everybody and welcome back to the Cutting Edge Action YouTube channel. This video is going to be a full review on the SOG Terminus XR LTE. I'm going to be straightforward and say I love the SOG Terminus XR LTE, especially with this beautiful gold coating on the blade, the hardware, and the pocket clip. This knife is so close to perfect. This knife and my Flash ATXR kind of restored my faith in the SOG brand to make something more than a cheap beater that you would pick up at Walmart for 20 bucks. However, my Terminus has a rattle right by the pivot, and I don't know what the cause is. It could be as simple as the pivot screws being loose, and I've purposely put off disassembling the knife so I could go through the process live during this video. Let's find out if SOG really has stepped up the game, or if their quality control still just simply isn't there. Now, as far as the blade deployment goes on this knife, the deployment on the Terminus XR is just about as good as it gets. The knife responds exactly as you'd expect it to every single time you use it, and you have 3 different options to deploy the knife, all of them feeling great. You've got the flipper tab on the back of the knife here. You have got the XR locking mechanism, which is just like the Benchmade Axis lock, albeit done just a little bit differently for the SOG brand. And then you also have thumb studs on the blade. All 3 of those options feel just fantastic, and they really make the knife fire with a sense of purpose and certainty that is fairly hard to come by, especially at the price point. But no matter which one of these opening mechanisms you use, firing this knife and then retracting it is just an excellent experience. You get a great sense of feel and feedback whenever you start to push on the flipper tab or push on the thumb studs. That really tells you exactly how much force you're going to need, especially once you get the knife lubricated properly, to make sure that the blade just flies out every single time with no stutters, no issues. This thing never gets caught. I never feel like I'm not going to apply enough force to the thumb stud and it's going to get stuck. It just flies out every single time. The locking procedure on this knife is another real strong point. Once you get used to bar lock style knives, the lock on the Terminus is extremely fun and easy to operate. It gently pulls the blade back in once you get it to a certain point, so I'll show you that here, up close and personal. As I start to pull the blade back in, I will hit a certain point where it's going to stop and then quickly get sucked back into the case. Let me show you that again. There we go. So you can see as soon as I reach that point, the bar lock hooks onto the knife and just pulls the blade ever so nicely back into the case. Now I can show you that the opposite direction. If I engage the lock with the knife closed, using my thumb on the opposite side of the knife, you can see that the blade just lifts out of the handles a little bit to give you the slightest bit of assistance when you go to flip it open using the XR lock. And I really like that. It makes this thing so easy to fire. Now I know so far all I've done is talk positively about this knife, except for the rattle of course, but the combination of the carbon fiber liners and the S35 VN blade steel here give this knife a superb feeling of rigidity and quality. When locked, it is just about impossible to get the blade to move to the left or right at all. This thing is dead centered, built very nicely. As you can see, it is so rigid and so strong, nicely centered there between our 2 carbon fiber liners, and it just feels so absolutely solid with those carbon fiber liners and this nice piece of S35 VN. Even though the steel is a little thin, it is very hard and it shows. This thing is so rigid. Definitely more rigid than any single Benchmade I own. Even the Mini Super Freak, or the 565-1, I believe, with the carbon fiber scales and S90V. This thing is absolutely more solid feeling in the hand than that carbon fiber Benchmade. All of the parts fit together here so well and with such tight tolerances that it feels like one solid object even when the blade is open. And like I said before, I would go so far as to say that it feels more solid than my 565-1 Mini Freak, which is almost exactly twice as much as this SOG. The only other knife I have with a comparable level of rigidity to this knife is probably my ZT-0460 Ti. I would say that feels just as rigid and tight as this knife, but for the price, the level of tightness that you get here is excellent. Now onto the steel choice. The Terminus XR LTE features S35VN steel, hardened to 6062. And this knife is clearly a cutting tool, so I'm fine with that level of hardness. This is not a prying tool by any measure of the word. I've used this knife extensively at work for cutting, and it has yet to require even any stropping, let alone sharpening. I regularly use it to go through dense cardboard, which is known to dull edges extremely quickly, so I would have expected to have to strop this knife quite a long time ago, but it still separates paper with very minimal force, as I'll show you now. So I've got a real thin piece of coupon paper here. Let's go ahead and give this guy a shot. Like I said, this has not been stropped a single time after cutting tons and tons of cardboard, and it really just makes this look like I'm cutting through with a razor blade. It is incredibly sharp even still, and that edge shows no signs of dulling whatsoever. Even at the tip, you can see it just goes right in. I think the S35VN here ended up being a great choice to keep the price down on this knife just a little bit while still providing excellent performance. The G10 scales here are really good. The finish isn't quite as good as my Benchmade Mini Freak, but I would guess because of course this is a fake carbon fiber pattern applied over the G10 and not actual carbon fiber, whereas the Benchmade is a solid piece of carbon fiber. But this still looks excellent here with that subtle ridge pattern cut into the scales to give you just a little bit of extra grip right where your fingers are going to be prone to resting while you're using this knife. The liners are a bit of a point of contention for me. Even though I said they really make the knife feel very rigid and very strong, I think it would have made more sense here to build the exterior handles out of carbon fiber, I guess that you could call those the scales, and then make the liners steel. I think that would have made a lot more sense, or at least a very small subliner that maybe came to about the halfway point of the knife. It doesn't need to go all the way back, but I think a steel liner here would have made the XR lock operate just a little bit better. The XR lock still operates very, very nicely, and you do get good feedback from it, but the carbon fiber liners, I think, are just a little too rough to make this XR lock glide smoothly. And the reason I say that is because I can feel it rubbing on the carbon fiber just a little bit as I move my thumb here. And I also have that SOG flash, and it does not suffer from that same problem with the steel liners. So I think what SOG should really do here is take the carbon fiber liners, move those to the outside, and make those the scales that you're actually holding on to still give it that excellent rigidity, and then use a partial steel liner to make the XR lock just a little bit smoother to operate. Other than that, I really can't say I would make any changes to how the lock works. That simple change, I think, would really make this knife a true 10 out of 10 for me. The feeling of lubricated steel on steel is a lot better than the rub that you feel with the steel lock bar. I would assume the lock bar is steel against the carbon fiber liners, because that carbon fiber simply cannot provide the same level of glide that you can get with smoothly machined steel. The screws here are coated, and they are very good looking, as you can see. They've held their coating very nicely, sliding in and out of my pocket, being dropped on concrete, etc. These screws show really no signs of wear whatsoever, except on this pivot. I've got just the tiniest bit of wear where the coating has started to come away there. When you're dealing with coatings, that's pretty much to be expected, so I don't think I can really fault them at all for that, as the steel has not received any damage at all. It's just that coating that has started to wear a little bit. The deep carry pocket clip on the Terminus XR LTE is very nicely coated and subtly displays the SOG logo in gray. I like this a lot more than their pocket clips that have SOG cut out into the pocket clip itself. I think those are prone to catching on threads, catching on your jeans, and just being kind of a pain. So I like how they went with this very small deep carry clip here that makes the knife disappear into your pocket. Shows that you're still carrying a SOG from the outside, and just really has a great look when somebody sees it on your pocket. It almost looks like a nice pen when they see this beautifully coated gold clip. The thumb studs on this knife are positioned well and very well coated, just like the rest of the knife. As you can see, the thumb studs show basically no signs of wear whatsoever, even though I have used them a ton since I got this knife because the fidget factor is so high. And they provide plenty of feedback every time you fire it to make sure you've got enough force going in the right direction to make the knife fire. The lock components are really good. The lock is reliable and very secure. And like I said before, it's not as smooth as I think it could be, but it still provides perfect lockup and fantastic rigidity. When you're cutting with this thing, it feels like a fixed blade, I'll say it. The cutting performance on this knife, like I showed when I was cutting that thin coupon paper, is just absolutely superb. I think the stock here is just about the right thickness. It's not too crazy thin to where you feel like you're not getting your money's worth or like it's not robust enough. It is just thick enough to make this knife feel very strong, but still thin enough to feel slicey, like a ZT-0460 for example, or a Benchmade bug out. It's very nice and thin and slicey, especially at the cutting edge, and it tears through paper, cardboard with no issues. I think this knife is probably rigid enough that you could get away with doing some mild wood cutting at it. I wouldn't want to split logs with this, but I bet you could, and I don't think it would be any worse for wear after doing so. The length of the blade here is 3 inches with a 2.75 inch cutting edge, and the geometry here is another really strong point. I love how it looks. It is walking that fine line between beauty and aggression, which I think very few collectible items are able to get away with. To give a comparison to the car world, I think something else that walks this line is the Ferrari 458. It is aggressive, yet beautifully striking at the same time, and that is the same vibe I get from this knife. This knife, I would say, also has just enough beauty and elegance to not be intimidating to the layperson who might be scared of a larger knife or something scarier looking. The geometry of the blade is yet another strong point here. The mild drop point and hollow grind are extremely appealing, especially when paired with this nicely done gold coating. Durability of this knife for me has proven so far to be excellent. I've owned it for several months now, and I've used it fairly hard. I've tried doing a whole bunch of different things with it. I have dropped it numerous times on concrete and other surfaces that would be prone to scuff it up, and it really does not seem any worse for wear, apart from just a few flecks of the coating that are missing there on the blade, as you can see. And then of course that little bit of the coating that is missing on this one pivot screw. Other than that, I think you'd be hard pressed to find imperfections on this knife. It seems like it's just about impervious to any kind of damage that you could want to throw at it. Durability on this knife, again, has proven to be excellent. I've owned it for several months now, and I've used it pretty hard and tried to do a bunch of different things with it. The only physical changes I've noticed are some very small chips in the coating right by the text here, which you can see, and those few chips on the pivot point. I've dropped this knife on concrete and other surfaces that would be prone to scuff up just about any knife, and I cannot find basically a single imperfection on the handles or on the pocket clip. This thing is just really well put together, and it just holds up so well even under intense scrutiny. For ergonomics, I'd say the grip is good, but it could be a little better. The finish of these faux carbon fiber G10 handles here can be a little slick when you've got sweaty hands, but those cutouts do help just a little bit to help you get a little bit of extra grip. And the jimping on the back of the blade gives you a real nice place to rest your thumb and give yourself some confidence when you're cutting through something a little denser. In the style category, the action here is just the right balance, I think, of subtle and flashy. You've got a real delicate balance here of beautiful and aggressive. And I think the Terminus XR LTE walks a very fine line that few collectible items are able to get away with. I'll draw a comparison to the Ferrari 458 in the car world. It somehow manages to be both angry and enticing at the same time. The looks here, I would say, are just superb overall, probably a 9.5 out of 10. Alright guys, so we have reached the fit and finish section of my review template, and this is where the review is about to get interesting. Let's break out the Torx bits and see just exactly what's causing this annoying rattle. So you've probably noticed in my videos that all the audio that I record in the studio is passed through a filter to remove background noise in real time, and that allows me to make sure that I can edit over clips of the knife firing to get perfect audio captures. But what I'm going to do now is go ahead and turn off my background noise filter so that I can let you guys hear the rattle here in the studio. Alright guys, so now that you've heard the rattle on the knife, let's go ahead and see if we can get it disassembled. The reason this video has taken me so long to get out and produce compared to my other videos is because I tried to shoot this segment of the video the other day, and the knife actually ended up being so well built that the pivot screw just completely destroyed one of my tiny little Torx T6 bits. So I had to go and buy another set. Alright, let's see if we can get this guy broken down. I'll start with the body screws this time. We'll just go one by one, and I'm going to try to make sure that I can remember the positioning of each one of these. So what I like to do when I'm disassembling my knives is I like to lay them out in the same exact positions on my work surface as they go back into the knife. It kind of gives me a nice visual representation of just exactly what I'm going to need to do to get a knife put back together. Alright, so luckily it looks like these body screws aren't Loctited in like crazy, unlike the pivot screw. And thankfully, I believe the pivot screw did not strip at all during my last attempt. So hopefully, starting with the body screws this time, maybe I will have a little bit more luck. Got one more body screw down here. Looks like that one is the pocket clip. Go ahead and get the clip removed now. Goes right there. Wow, that is a really long little Torx T6 screw. Very specialty screw there. Check that out. Alright, now it looks like the pocket clip just pulls right out nicely, and it is, of course, reversible. So that's out of there. Let's see, what else do we need to take apart here? Okay, it looks like that's it, apart from the pivot. And now you might see me take my hands off camera here a little bit, just to try to get a little bit more leverage on this thing, because that pivot screw is really, really tight. So let's see if I can manage to get it at least started here on camera. Alright, so what I'm going to try to do now is put some pressure between the frame of the knife. See if I can get this spacer out of there and that extra screw. Okay. Got that done. Alright, now let's see if I apply pressure. Try to spread the knife apart while I use my driver. If it looks like that pivot pin is just spinning, unfortunately. Or maybe I'm wrong, maybe it is starting to come apart. Let's see. Apply some more pressure to these handles. I really hope these pieces of G10 or carbon fiber don't snap on me. But man, that would make for some interesting content. We are getting really down into the weeds here now. So I wasn't having any luck with my brand new Klein Torx bit and the other Craftsman one that I had. It seemed like I was either just going to destroy another Torx T6 bit and have to buy another kit, or I was going to destroy the pivot screw and it would look terrible, and then I would have to break out the angle grinder and cut a slot in it and then use a Phillips driver, and I thought that was just dumb. So we are going to resort to the old soldering iron trick. I've got my iron heated up here, I think, and ready to go. And now I'm just going to see if by holding this in the center of the pivot screw for several minutes to try to break down that Loctite, if we can finally get this thing open. Let's give it a shot. I don't know whether this is going to damage the coating at all, but I really want to get inside this thing to finish out this video. So I'm getting to the point where I'd be really willing to destroy that pivot screw and see if SOG will give me another one just to try to break inside this thing. Basically what we're doing here is we are relying on the flow of heat energy through the screw itself to get into that Loctite and try to break down the bond of the thread locker so that we can try to stick our 2 Torx screws back in there and then hopefully break this thing down. I might have to repeat this same process on the other side, but I'll hold this one. I might have to repeat the same process on the other side to try to get it to break down from another angle as well. But we'll do this for another minute, and then I'll see if just my 2 Torx drivers will be able to take it apart after that. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and put the iron up and see if that was long enough. Put the iron in a safe spot so that I don't burn the house down while trying to record this. This simple knife review, which I thought was going to be a nice quick video, is proving to be one of the most difficult videos I've ever made, period. And I've made a lot of YouTube videos, so hopefully I don't strip these screws any further or destroy any more Torx bits, because I really don't want to go buy another kit just to have the same thing happen. Alright guys, we are finally at the climax here. That was way more difficult than it needed to be to finally even get this pivot screw broken and started turning. But we are almost there now. I had to do it off camera because it just required more torque than I was able to give on camera with my microphone in front of me and at my desk. And it was extremely difficult. I really did think I was going to end up ruining another one of these really tiny Torx bits, but we are right there now. And as you can see, even with the screw backed out that much from the knife, I am still having to apply a ton of pressure. But finally got it. We got this thing apart. Okay, let's see what is going on here and why this thing is rattling. You'll have to forgive me. This is my first time getting this knife apart, and doing it on camera really adds an element of pressure that I'm not used to when it's my first time disassembling and maintaining a knife. Let's see, how does this thing go together? Okay, so it looks like we've got an Omega spring style situation, just like what Benchmade does there. I think what I need to do is actually just go ahead and take my, oh, that's magnetic. Take my long screwdriver and go ahead and poke that pivot out. All right. Get the blade out of there, make this a little safer. That is a fantastic blade design. Look at that. Looks like a fish ready to eat something. An anglerfish. Okay, so what do we have in here that could be making this thing rattle? Might have to do some closer inspection off camera to try to figure it out. I think I just found out what is causing that rattle. Yep, that was it. Okay. So there is something wrong with this little bearing and washer set that is just not quite right. Let's see what's going on. Okay guys, so I'm now seeing why it was so gosh darn difficult to take this knife apart. And the reason is they've got one side of the pivot screw, which is actually a screw right here, and then they've got the other side, which is the female end for the screw. Now the female end, as you can see, is keyed, meaning it has a flat side. But if you look straight through, as I hold this up, you will be able to see that no part of the design of the blade itself, nor the washer, nor the scales or the handles are keyed. So they've got a keyed design with no keyhole. It makes no sense. Alright, and now I'll be able to illustrate the issue with this problem live. I've got the pivot reinserted. Check this out. So the female end of the pivot is now just completely free spinning. You don't want that. You want the key so that when somebody goes to detach it with just a single Torx driver and not two, like I had to use, it doesn't spin. Okay guys, so I think we have finally reached a point where we can get to go ahead and closing out this video. Now, I started with basically a glowing review of this knife, but upon taking it apart, I found a few glaring problems. One of which you may have noticed, is that this bar here, this tiny little steel bar that holds the spacer inside of the handles, is just a little bit too short. And that is in fact what was actually causing the rattle. It was not at the pivot where I thought it was, which is why you saw me take it apart 2 times. Now, the other problem that I found is, of course, like I said before, the pivot itself, the female end of the pivot is keyed properly so that it doesn't rotate, and you would only need a single Torx T6 bit to take this knife apart. However, the actual bearings and washer and carbon fiber liners and G10 scales themselves are not keyed anywhere in that chain, meaning the key is totally useless and the pivot is free spinning. Now, I kind of still want to try to end this video on a positive note, so I'll say that this is still a very good pocket knife, but I'm definitely very soured by having to experience this live with you guys and you seeing just some of the design flaws that this thing has. Well, the bar probably isn't a design flaw, but rather just a manufacturing defect where the bore is too deep on one side of the liners or scales. And then the issue with the pivot, I wonder if maybe I just got one that was incorrectly assembled. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video here. I can't really give this knife my seal of approval with the issues that I've had with it so far. Instead, I'm going to follow this video up with a part 2 after I reach out to SOG and figure out if they can fix this issue. I really hope you guys enjoyed. Please leave a like. This one took me a long time to make. Go ahead and get subscribed if you're not subscribed already. Until next time, this has been Cutting Edge Action with my review of the SOG Terminus XR LTE. Part 1, apparently.